Hello, my presentation is on the power equation and climate futures in 2050. Hurricane Matthew, barreling through the Caribbean and the southeastern seashore of the United States, is the latest in the long litany of evidence dramatically bearing the ever-frightening face of climate change as it becomes a firm reality of contemporary human existence. According to a recent study published in the science journal Nature, of the total ocean temperature increase that has occurred since 1865, half of it has happened in the last 20 years. In that figure lies a sobering reality that all the conferences and agreements that have taken place over the last 2 decades and more, from Rio to Kyoto to Doha to Copenhagen to Bali to Paris, have hardly made any significant difference to the steady march of climate change and its accompanying global calamities. The question obviously is why? And the simple answer is that the existing power equation in the world allows a small international economic and political elite to push its interests over that of the vast majority of the world's population, and in fact, that of the planet itself. That power dynamic is a necessary condition for international capital to thrive, and it also sustains the lethal and iniquitous system we are a part of. Marx had witnessed the setting in of the destructive aftermath of capitalism in the mid-19th century. Commons which were hitherto shared by people were being enclosed as part of private property for exploitation and extraction. People uprooted from their land were being captured by the drudgery of the production process as cheap labor. Large spheres of life and social processes which had been untouched by the logic of profit were beginning to get commodified by the market. Imperialism had opened up vast swaths of land masses for rule and subordination. Science, which began as a wondrous way of understanding nature, had transformed into a monstrous tool for its domination. Crucially, in this regard, the discovery of fossil fuels and the imperial control over the politics of the Middle East allowed international capital to begin to mount complete control over the world economy. These socio-economic transformations acted as potent displays of the power of capitalism, and by extension of that logic, accomplishing these transformations made that ideology even more aware and convinced of its power. The most disquieting development was that these rapid changes were leading to the stiffening of the distinction between society and nature, a process initiated by European patriarchy with very specific ideas of what it meant to be human. The white male, with his power over the production process, constituted society, and the rest of the world essentially got categorized as nature to be exploited and subjugated. Maria Mies, the ecofeminist, described capitalism as the appropriation of women, nature, and the colonies. Those sentiments find an echo in Jason Moore's recent book, Capitalism in the Web of Life, where he succinctly points out that capitalism is a way of organizing nature. The gradual consolidation of that process of organization steadily opened up other perverse dichotomies which were built on the society-nature dualism and clearly characterized by the use of power, domination, and periodic violence by one over the other. In Moore's own words, this idea of nature and society is very deeply rooted in other dualisms of the modern world. The capitalist and the worker, the West and the rest, men and women, white and black, civilization and barbarism. All of these dualisms really find their taproots in the nature-society dualism. End quote. The havoc wrought on earth by the exploitative processes that capitalism unleashed and the pernicious categories it created has continued unabated in the century and a half since Marx. It has dehumanized people and defiled the land and the seas with intensity and scale never seen before. The current climate crisis is the culmination of all the previous messes that the earth has lurched through in recent times. species extinction, acid rain, radiation leaks, industrial pollution, desertification, and myriad other devastations. The issue of climate change finally consolidates the environmental, economic, social, and political exigencies creeping out of capitalism and free market fundamentalism into one violent and virulent monster with deadly tentacles of complex issues protruding from every corner of its body. We have nowhere to run and no option but to confront it. Marx firmly believed in the emancipatory character of power and not just in its capacity to usher in political change, but to alter the meaning of power itself. His observation regarding the Paris Commune is quite telling in this regard, even though the event itself left Marx largely disappointed with its results. He noted, "It was not a revolution to transfer the state from one fraction of the ruling class to another, but a revolution to break down this horrid machinery of class domination itself." End quote. While Marx focused resolutely on reconstructing capitalism from an economic point of view, he recognized earth as the first condition of human existence. He declared quite perceptibly that even a whole society, a nation, or even all simultaneously existing societies together are not the owners of the globe. They are only its possessors, its usufructuaries, and like good fathers of families, they must hand it down in an improved condition. Given the climate mess the Earth is facing, do we have the power to challenge global capitalism to improve the condition of the Earth, as Marx had suggested, before handing it over to the coming generations? And how would that power be calibrated? And if that attempt were successful, how would the new power equation impact climate justice by 2050? Global capital ensures its power and supremacy through three prominent mechanisms. It has an iron grip on politics within national boundaries as well as on the political interaction between countries in the international arena, so that the new liberal consensus is never questioned. So, whether through well-organized and popular yet sham rituals within the facade of electoral democracies, or by sheer brute force in ethically inured autocracies, the elite worldwide further their own economic interests at the cost of the environment and the people. Secondly, it thwarts any attempts at creating an economic alternative to the current mode of resource utilization, market mechanism, trade, and finance. It ensures the failure of any such explorations and then discredits them through its hold on message creation and dissemination. Thirdly, it controls the operative narrative within the system so as to prevent the germination of a challenge to its ideology. It does that through the educational system, media, and culture. The power of the international ruling class needs to be challenged on all these three fronts: politically through movements, economically through creation of alternative ways of being and living, and by creating avenues of the emergence of a new narrative. So what should be the goals of this challenge? Movements. Aligning and integrating the climate justice movements with the larger currents of socio-political struggle through cross-fertilization of ideological imperatives, coordination of strategic and tactical planning, and synchronization of activist programs, initiatives, and organizations. For alternatives, creating a platform for establishing, organizing, advocating, researching, documenting, and synthesizing alternative practices and thinking on alternative economic ways of being and next systems, which ensure climate justice and socio-economic equality. For communication strategy, establishing channels of subversive and insurgent message creation and dissemination which challenge the corporate media and ultimately discredit it by formulating a credible and accessible alternative narrative to project a vision of an alternative future on people's minds. Integrating the three components for power and solidarity is another important issue. And here the ultimate aim would be to put into motion cooperation between movement activists, practitioners of alternatives, and communicators, both nationally and internationally, so as to intervene at the level of the power equation itself on behalf of the earth and the vast majority of the disempowered people. Let's look at power and movements. The importance of hope. The most crucial aspect of mobilizing for and organizing a movement for climate justice is to empower people with hope. There is a lot of information that people already have access to about the climate crisis facing the earth and how dispiriting and overwhelming it is. The only way we don't get paralyzed into inaction is by believing in our hope for a better future. Now, that could be an affirmative hope for positive action, or it could be a desperate attempt defined by, oh my God, if we don't do something, then we are doomed, and becoming a part of the climate justice movement is our only hope. In both ways, people feel empowered to act and realize that there are avenues accessible to everybody to push back on the power of the ruling elite. That realization leads to a feeling of solidarity. Secondly, finding your front line. People approach an issue from different angles. Somebody finds it immoral to debase the earth. Another person has an intellectual connection with the climate justice debate. Someone's birthplace has just been ravaged by a hurricane. Yet another is beginning to face regular water scarcity in his or her neighborhood. People have their own individual connection with the need to create solidarity against the power of international capital and to promote climate justice. This allows the pool of people who are willing to join the movement expand exponentially. They figure out the best option for them and fight the fight on different front lines. Disruption is the key. The ruling elite effectively sells the myth of normality to the masses. Things may cause concern sometimes, but there's nothing abnormal about them. It's par for the course. They also promote false solutions to critical issues, green economy, eco-modernism, techno-fixes, etc. Yet, they never follow the trail of clues to the doorstep of capitalism because that would compromise their power. Climate justice movement has to disrupt that notion of normality through regular, visible action which interrupts the processes that allow the functioning of corporate enterprises, particularly the ones based on fossil fuel. The Keystone Pipeline protest and the current Dakota pipeline resistance by indigenous peoples organizations are a case in point. Similarly, divestment movements in the American university system should get support from other climate and social justice movements to weaken the power of the fossil energy giants. Joint and coordinated action plans should be implemented to disrupt the functioning of the universities to promote divestment. Coming to electoral politics. Movements have to explore avenues for participation in the electoral process. This could be by movement activists joining established parties and trying to push their climate justice agenda to prominence. Bernie Sanders showed that it was possible to raise a lot of relevant issues which the Democratic Party had ignored previously by joining the presidential race. His ability to mobilize people, particularly the youth, was phenomenal. The ripple effects of Sanders' insurgent campaign are being felt in many down-ballot electoral battles all over the US. Movements could also align with already acknowledged promoters of the climate issue like the Green Party to support their candidates in various local, state, and national elections. To oppose the power of the ruling elite, movements should also mobilize against money in politics in the US. Target both parties with petitions, pickets, and advertisements, organize national, state, and district protest marches against candidates running with the support of corporate money. Support candidates refusing corporate money with individual money and organizational support. Start a national campaign against Citizens United and work towards amending the Constitution. Finally, build up momentum in favor of public funding of elections at all levels in the country. All these steps would lay the foundation of a radical ecological democracy, which is needed for ensuring climate justice. Targeting big banks and finance capital. As soon as the new president takes office, a rolling resistance movement should be started against the power of big banks and finance capital in a resurrection of the Occupy and anti globalization movements in both urban and rural areas of the United States. The protests should define a short term goal of increasing the number of public banks in the country, which should be addressed and debated by the Congress and the Senate, and definite commitment should be extracted from both parties. A campaign should also be started for people from around the United States to learn about the thriving public banking system in North Dakota. Short documentaries, public awareness spots, and public talks should be arranged for people to have access to that information. A movement should be organized for students and young people from all over the country to visit public banking officials in North Dakota or interact with them virtually. These visits and interactions should be publicized through the internet to create a groundswell in support of public banking. Coming to power and alternatives, the economic part of it. The search for alternatives to the capitalist economy is an important component in the establishment of a new power equation. The goals of this research would be to resist, reject, and replace the notion of profit as the motivating force of human interactions. To reinforce the wisdom of fulfilling needs, not wants. And thirdly, to encourage and instill a sense of creative harmony with nature, where human needs are met without destroying nature and without creating an imbalance between human beings and the environment. This ideological imperative will be implemented with the following strategy. Cooperative forms of production would be the basis of industry. All decisions regarding the raising of capital, setting up of infrastructure and machinery, production targets, etc., and other day-to-day activities would be taken through an informed, consultative, and democratic process. All personnel would have an equal say in the decision-making process, whatever be the nature of their specialization. Banks and financial institutions would also be cooperatively owned and would work on behalf of the people. The chief aim of the banks would be to facilitate and sustain economic activity in its area of operation and not to make unnecessary profit. The chief economic unit would be an ecoregion. It would be created on the basis of its common ecological and geographical features. It could, for instance, be a coastal mangrove area or a mountainous region or flat arid area. All economic activity in an ecoregion would be designed around its ecology and would maintain its integrity. There could be multiple autonomous ecoregions within a nation state, and there could also be ecoregions which comprise of states in 2 or 3 different countries. Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, and northern Mexico could form an economically autonomous ecoregion. This would encourage cooperation based on ecological necessities and discourage nationalism. It would also reduce the possibility of resource-based conflicts and ultimately the expenditure on production for destruction, processes like the manufacture of weapons and other related technology. All economic activity would be guided by the larger goal of maintaining environmental equilibrium, and all industrial and production activity would have to submit itself to periodic public environmental audits. All surplus would be shared equally among the members of a particular production unit. Economic activity would not be guided by the principle of endless growth. In fact, degrowth would be the operative idea behind the production process. It would be guided by downscaling of production and consumption, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. This would ensure that the objective of an economic activity would be to meet the needs of the people and not the greed of shareholders. The production process would be based on locally obtained resources. All economic needs would preferably be fulfilled by what is produced locally. Economy would be built around the principles of the commons, and it would value and protect common assets, managing them for the benefit of everyone. Trade would be encouraged only in very essential items. This would reduce the wastage on transportation and initiate the process of deglobalization. Fossil fuel-based energy production would be abolished, and a transformation would be done to clean energy. This would ensure that the biggest threat to climate justice would be taken care of. Finally, a communication strategy for transforming the power dynamic. The communication strategy would focus on hope as the basis of a person's power to challenge the capitalist assault on the planet, both individually and collectively. It would challenge the corporate media's at continuing the false and insipid current dialectic of left versus right debate on climate change. It would prevent the discussion from collapsing into the center as the media would like it to. The communication strategy would focus on new and non-traditional modes of communicating its point of view. It would create insurgent web-based channels to promote radical ideas on climate justice and also promote more person-to-person avenues for disseminating ideas in the public sphere through street theater, flash mobs, etc. It would raise financial resources through crowdsourcing and always resist being co-opted by corporate media and well-funded environmental groups. The communication strategy would promote disruptive interruptions and discussions, radio and TV programs, and other such venues being sponsored by the corporate media through well-coordinated activist participation in calls and questioning. It would promote cooperation and collaboration between channels of communications representing indigenous people, movement activists, labor organizations, left researchers, etc. It would also promote open interactive sessions between people from different nations and cultures and which would be accessible to people on the web. The communication strategy would promote the treatment of the climate as a natural organism and an extension of the human existence. It would thus focus on climate justice as a desire for justice to one's own self and other fellow human beings. Finally, to a realistic assessment, what would 2050 look like? Is it possible to achieve a transformation in the power equation to achieve climate justice? Well, the path to climate justice is certainly not an easy one. Would a global elite, which is inflicting incredible violence on the earth and misery on a vast majority of its people, ever let a new egalitarian power dynamic be established? Would it not use all its resources and even violence to resist any attempt at decreasing its power? What would the military and the corporations do to maintain control over the chaos that is bound to erupt as a result of increasing climate crisis? What would happen to civil liberties and global legal regimes? The threat of apparent violence has always existed behind the expression of power. Hannah Arendt, the German-American political theorist, examined the nature of the relationship between the two concepts and found that they were distinct from each other, and blatant violence at most is a perversion of power. Power, according to Arendt, is the human ability not just to act, but to act in concert. When we say of somebody that he is in power, we actually refer to his being empowered by a certain number of people to act in their name. End quote. What would happen when the people in whose name the power elite rule, the unsuspecting participants in capitalism as consumers and producers, realize they are not part of that equation at all? According to Arendt, power is not created through violence. In fact, when power devolves to violence, it is eventually destroyed. In words which turned out to be quite prophetic in an analysis of totalitarian states, Arendt confirmed that power and violence are opposites. Where the one rules absolutely, the other is absent. Violence appears where power is in jeopardy, but left to its own course, it ends in power's disappearance. End quote. Is the rise in racial, national, and environmental violence all over the world a pointer towards the beginning of the unraveling of its power structure? Is violence the betraying sign of a change, albeit quite slow and messy? It feels as if the notion of power known to the world, however pernicious it was, is stretched at its seams and collapsing routinely. Violence fills the vacuum sporadically, but without really being able to provide long-term stability to the structure. The present moment, consumed as it is by corporate and financial greed, is truly a moment of oppressive indifference for anyone who doesn't share its logic of immediate gratification and sustained profit. What it shares, however, with the predicament of a substantial subset of the population of the world is the violence it has committed to the ecology and the climate worldwide. It's going to be a long and unpredictable road to 2050. Thank you.